Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Well, we've got 10 minutes before 8 is the time. Another day and another story about the rail network in the headlines. And here with details about additional investment, and particularly, it says here, for stations in the north, the Trans-Pennine route. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps joins me now. Well, good morning to you, Secretary of State. Where's the money going and what will it provide for?
Yeah, this is £401 million. It's going to go for passenger and freight. A lot of it across the North and Midlands, not exclusively, some of it to the port of Southampton as well, or rather to improve routes for freight. It's important because actually as we come out of this lockdown, people start to move around again. And regardless, with freight, of course, people have been getting a lot of that delivered to their homes. We've got to have a network capable of transporting it all. And that's what today's announcement, together with some new stations, a place called Marsh Barton in Exeter and another place called White Rose at Thorpe Park in Leeds, getting communities better connected as well. So lots of good programmes here to connect people and communities together.
How do you and your colleagues determine where the lines should go and indeed where new stations should be provided? Secretary of State.
Some of it is incredibly obvious because, you know, if you have ever travelled from Manchester to Leeds, actually by car or by rail, you'll know that it is not a good journey. And particularly by rail, this line meanders all over the place, takes far too long. If that was somewhere down in London South, perhaps in the south, you would get from Manchester to Leeds in about half an hour. And that's what we want to do. We want to upgrade that route to bring together those two great northern cities together with York and Liverpool and elsewhere, and kind of compress the journey times. So to answer your question, sometimes it's just very obvious. Other times, a bit more technical to do with freight transport and the like. And yet on other occasions, still things like the New Stations Fund, which is how those new stations are coming about that we're talking about today, because local communities have bid in to say, if we had a station here, we could unlock this community. We could have people, perhaps youngsters, stay in their town rather than automatically move away whenever they can. And that's our levelling up agenda in action.
Should we stay with the theme of unlocking? And I refer my listeners to a piece you've written in one of the newspapers today, the Daily Telegraph, in which it appears we're going to unlock the space industry. It's a very punchy intro that you put on there, Mr. Shapps. Sometime next year, we expect a giant Boeing 747 will take off from Newquay in Cornwall with a rocket strapped to its inner port wing. It will then soar out into the Atlantic to a launch altitude of some 40,000 feet and release its payload. Give my listeners more details on that, Secretary of State.
Yes. Well, I've watched one of these launches on video, I should say, live, and it is exactly that. It's a new way of launching satellites into space. They launch from the underbelly of a 747. A rocket at 40,000 feet then detaches and propels itself up into orbit and then releases perhaps even something like a dozen nano satellites at a time, and that's the payload. And those could be, for example, to monitor Earth observation of things like, it could be for anything, but it could be for things like, you know, climate change, monitoring weather patterns to provide earlier warnings of extreme events and the like. So massive advantages scientifically. The exciting thing is and the reason I've written this article today is we're just laying the last sort of bits of the law change to enable these launches to take place from the UK. And the UK will therefore become, we hope next year, the first country in Europe to launch satellites from its own territory. So you will have seen France launches, but it launches from French Guiana or somewhere like that. This will be satellite launches from Europe.
So we're in the space race, Mr. Shapps.
Indeed, yes. We actually have a distinction of being, I think, the only country in the world to have launched a satellite from its own developed space program and then to have abandoned the entire program in the very early 70s. So it's sort of, you know, we are back 50 years later, but we are back.
Okay. That we celebrate that. Let's come back to Earth with a bit of a bump and talk about these travel restrictions and the traffic light system. Perhaps I can share with you an email from David in Gloucestershire. Could you ask Grant Shapps, when can we fly to New York for the birth of our grandson? This is not a holiday. People are getting desperate. They don't fully understand the rules. When are we going to hear more? Secretary of State.
I really feel for your listener in Gloucestershire. Having a new grandchild and not be able to visit them must be very, very tough. The primary issue. The first issue is that the United States of America currently has an executive order that was signed by the previous President Trump. 212F is the executive order, which bans visitors from the UK and Europe, if they've been in the UK or Europe 14 days beforehand. That is the particular block which needs to be removed.
But I understood as of April, you can enter New York from another country. You can go to New York.
Well, this is a federal rather than a state executive order, which
but does it not
overlays
go
the
state by
entire
state?
country. No, this federal order needs to be
What would
removed
happen to this gentleman were he to fly at the United States end? Are you telling me that he would have to quarantine in the United States?
I believe they'd actually turn him away. It won't even be allowed to remain. So it's not that you can go there and quarantine, it's that you can't enter at all. So that's obviously the
Can
first
I read
thing.
you from the New York government website? Asymptomatic travellers entering New York from another country, US state or territory are no longer required to test or quarantine as of April the 10th, 2021.
So that was a state-based rule.
Well, that's what I did
and what
ask
they're
you,
saying
New
is
York.
if you were coming from a location, forget Executive Order 212F, which happens to apply to UK, Europe, Brazil, and some other countries. What New York is saying is, in the past, if you entered New York from another state or from another country, which wasn't on
So
that
he could
212 ban. No, not if he's been in Europe or the UK for the 14 days beforehand. He cannot, because the federal law overrides all of that. That's the state of New York saying, wherever you were coming from prior to that, even somewhere else in America, then you weren't supposed to enter. And particularly because we are one of the countries on their federal 212 executive order.
So this gentleman and his wife could possibly be faced being turned around and put on the next jet back to the United Kingdom.
Yes, that's right, unfortunately. And it's obviously not a satisfactory...
And we're sure about that, because it does seem to read that you don't need to test or neither quarantine as of April, as of last month.
But as I say, that's related to each state imposed its own rules.
Okay.
You know, so New York was sort of saying, look, you may not come here from anywhere, regardless of the executive order, but the executive order is the thing which overlays all of that and specifically bans UK and Europe at the moment.
We're coming to the end of our time together. You and I have talked about e-scooters in the past, and you are aware that there are some trials ongoing. But you might not be aware that the Kent's Police and Crime Commissioner has said that the inconsiderate riders are, quotes, becoming a menace. We're in danger of losing control of the issue, placing additional burdens on policing. Dame Cressida Dick, appearing on this show, said that there are concerns. Are you completely comfortable about e-scooters, Secretary of State?
Well, one of the reasons to carry
Secretary
out
of State, you became there. I do apologise. Secretary of State, even.
One of the reasons to have these trials is to ensure that they can be used safely and, for example, always be insured and always be up to certain standards in terms of design and manufacture. I think that that Kent example is related to people privately using them. And just to remind listeners, they are not legal to purchase and use on our roads or our pavements currently.
But you can hire them in some cities.
When you hire them, you're hiring them with insurance to certain manufactured standards, with maximum speeds, with the ability for them to be...
But that is confusing. Be fair,
remotely.
Secretary of State.
Yeah.
I can't buy one, but I can hire one. I mean, that is a bit odd.
A little bit of background on this is the law actually doesn't allow them, because the law, which was from many years before e-scooters were thought of and invented at all, treats them as vehicles. So the only way to carry out any kind of trial was to use proper hired ones, which then have to conform to a whole bunch of standards. I think the problem may be occurring that's been described there for people who are going out and purchasing them, using them on the roads, and that is not legal.
One last minute with you, Secretary of State. Did you ever hear the Prime Minister refer to COVID as Kung Flu?
Never, no.
Did you ever hear that he wanted to be infected with COVID effectively injected on live TV, Mr. Shapps?
No, never again, no.
What do you make of these alleged assertions we're going to hear later today from Dominic Cummings?
It's a bit of a circus from someone who was there at the time and had the facility and ability to influence a lot of these decisions, of course. What I would encourage people to do is first of all, what I'd encourage people to do is, rather than tune into his evidence, tune into mine on the Transport Select Committee, when I'll be talking about the rail white paper that I launched last week at the same time. But failing that, just look at what's actually happened with the government's response to coronavirus. With, what is it now, 73% of adults having been provided with the first vaccination, over 44% with the second vaccination, everybody entitled to 2 corona tests a week, half the world's genome sequencing. Those fantastic British firsts are a result of the decisions that the Prime Minister and others were making a year and more ago. And that's been the real outcome of decisions that were made at the time. So I don't think we need to worry about, he said, she said from that point of time.
You never heard the PM say COVID only kills the over 80s?
No, and it clearly doesn't. So, that's not true. And as I say, it's slightly odd, given that, one of the other things that was claimed was the Prime Minister said, we won't have, in colourful language, we won't have further lockdowns. Well, that was supposedly in October, since when we had a November lockdown and a January lockdown, which we're still coming out of, which will have saved many thousands of lives. So I just encourage people to look at what's actually happened, what we've actually done, the world-beating vaccine rollout for any country of our size, and you can see that the right decisions were being made at the right time as it happens.
Grateful for your time. Thank you. Secretary of State for Transport Grant Shapps appearing here on LBC, where the time is 1 minute after 8. News with Thomas Watts is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has dismissed Dominic Cummings' appearance before MPs as a sideshow. Boris Johnson's former aide is expected to use an evidence session this morning to criticise ministers' response to the pandemic. He's been increasingly vocal in his condemnation since leaving government in November. Peter Cardwell, who was sacked as an advisor by Mr Cummings, says everyone in Westminster has an agenda.
I think what Dominic Cummings will come out with is his version of the truth. I think he sincerely believes everything he says, and I think he's bringing it out into the open to get his point across and also to damage Boris Johnson and the government as much as possible.
The coronavirus vaccination programme in England is being expanded to people aged 30 and 31. Around 1 million invitations will be sent by text